the talent he is. Proper chatterbox yada. If you're keen, it'll be brilliant. Today, we're going to keep it simple. I'll bark out a basic command and you watch. Keen to know? He'll set your tail wagging. Does mine, hence why I'm backing him. Right then, Wookie here. Do take a seat, won't you? Give us your full attention while we listen to my pal, Yada.
Thank you, Wookie, for the lovely introduction. I appreciate that very much. An extra dog bone for you this evening. It is a pleasure to be with you. I think this is now part 5 on our series on Shabuwah. We're doing the basics. The first category of basics is the Moedim, which are the restoring witnesses to the eternal testimony and the appointed meetings by God. We have already completed, although I think we'll probably do a second show on Pesach, on Passover. We've done matzah, which is unyeasted bread, with a couple of programs. I think we devoted 3 to Bakurim, and now we are on a roll here, number 5 on Shabuwah. I think we'll be in Shabuwah for a while because there's so many related topics to it. We're currently considering something that you normally wouldn't think of that would be appropriate to cover on Shabuwah, but is actually essential. And that is because Shabuwah was stolen, like everything else in Christianity. Everything in Christianity is stolen from one religion or another, or from one person or another, one God or another. It's a mix of an amalgamation of truth and lies in pure babble, Bible style. And in this particular case, it's Eusebius. After, the book of Acts takes Shabuwah and it turns Shabuwah into Pentecost, and then changes Shabuwah from a harvest that is going to be fulfilled this year and next into the birth of their church. And they quoted the prophet Joel, completely out of context to demonstrate this. And claimed that people spoke, that the purpose of the fulfillment of Shabuwah was for people to speak a whole bunch of different languages, none of which, by the way, were Hebrew. And the purpose of Shabuwah is as a harvest, and it takes place 7 years prior to the return of Dode, who is the actual Messiah, with Yahweh, which is the actual name of God. And so they were wrong by 2,000 years. And then the prophet Yoel was speaking of those last days, so they picked a prophet who was addressing events that would take place 2,000 years after the events they were allegedly reporting. So they got nothing right. But in stealing Shabuwah, making it Pentecost for them, just as they stole Dode's Messiah title, Son of God title, and Savior title, they stole all those from Dode. And the God-man who was killed and then resurrected was stolen from Dionysus. Even baptism was sold from the Sibylline oracles of the Roman Senate. So it's all stolen. And to pursue this cavalcade of identity theft, Eusebius was the one who recognized that there was no justification at all for this concept of a Christ. There's no prophecy in the Torah, prophets and Psalms of a coming Christ. There's no prophecy regarding a Jesus, not a single mention of a Jesus or of a Christ. And so somehow when Eusebius was reading the text that he had inherited, he realized, if I'm going to put together a New Testament according to Paul, I need something that says, well, you're that Christ guy that was predicted. And so he did. He wrote it into the text. It wasn't there. You can look at every first, second, third, and early 4th century manuscript codices of the Greek New Testament, and you won't find any reference to either of the places, one in Mark, one in Matthew, where there's where these lines, this whole discussion, any part of this discussion exists. And so not only does it take place by Eusebius's writing in front of the gates of hell, in front of the statuary to Pan, which is incredibly indicting. And if there really was a Jesus fellow and he was God, guess where he's never going to be? He is never going to be talking to people and his little team in front of the gates of hell. And yet that's where he sets this. So that part's absurd. Of course, the other part of it that is absolutely absurd is there's no prophecy that speaks of an arriving Christ. So for somebody to say, "Oh, I know who you are. You're the Christ," it would come out of thin air. I mean, because there is no prophecy that predicts an arriving Christ. So why would somebody come to this conclusion? Moreover, this is 3 years allegedly into Gospel Jesus's so-called ministry, and you want to tell me that in the first 3 years he didn't mention who he was? Never once? What were they talking about? I mean, fishing? I caught a whopper one day. Well, how to row a boat? What were they talking about? If he never identified who he was, and he had to have them guess in the 3rd year, and they do so, and they have this little guessing game outside of the satyr's home, the gates to hell, and it doesn't show up in any 1st, 2nd, 3rd, or early 4th century manuscript, and it doesn't appear until after the wholesale changes appeared under Constantine and Eusebius. And then I just went through on the previous program, and I told you about Eusebius's fantasy about the statue of Jesus compared to the statue of Pan, and how the god came and struck it with lightning and it rusted. I mean, it's pathetic. To be a Christian, you have to have your head in a cesspool and think it tastes, like caviar.
Small minds are easily impressed.
Oh my God, it's so bad. So anyway, we're going to continue with this theme here, and Eusebius is the one who, in front of the gates of hell, is the one who wrote Peter's alleged profession. By the way, there was no Peter. The man's name was Shimon. There were no disciples. Dode was the actual Messiah and Son of God, and he had brothers. One of his brothers was named Shimon. Another one was named Yahuchanan. Another one was named Jacob. And it was from his brothers that Paul went to war. And as Paul wrote the first 14 books of the Christian New Testament and created the myth of Jesus, it is Paul who went to war with Dode's brothers. And they then got incorporated into the story as alleged disciples, of which there were none. So anyway, this is what he wrote. He said, that you are the Christ. You are the Son of the living God. By the way, it's a God whose name never appears once anywhere in the Christian New Testament. And God's very clear in his test of who speaks for him. If you do not use his name, do not know his name, you do not speak for him, which automatically annuls the Christian New Testament as inspired by God. And that's the only place where the Christian counterfeit of Messiah, this Christ nomenclature, is acknowledged as if it were an important title. And the important title, and it's not even in the top 10 of Dode's most important titles, is Masiach. Masiach, as a title, should have been transliterated into the Greek and into English. There should be absolutely no Christ. So even if we're going to pretend that there was a prophecy of a coming Messiah, and there isn't, then the very least they should have done is maintained the Masiach, because there is no reference to a Jesus or a Christ anywhere in the Torah, prophets, and Psalms. And Christ is from Chriso, which means to drug. And God's very clear on who is the Messiah, and he says it's Dode. And he says, if you're going to say anybody else other than Dode, you're calling him a liar. Read the 89th Mizmor. It's quite clear in this regard. And the only thing that could even be wildly interpreted as a prophecy of a coming Messiah would be when Dode, who is Gabriel, God's most courageous and competent man, he's not an angel, it's Dode. He's even identified as a man. Read the damn text, it's very clear. When Dode, as Gabriel, who is the Messiah, spoke of what he was going to do when he gave the exact timing of when he would fulfill matzah in 33 CE, year 4000 Yah. And so if that statement is true, and it is, then it is Dode as Gabriel who fulfilled Chag Matzah in 33 CE. And if he fulfilled Chag Matzah, it can't be Jesus, because there is no mention of Jesus doing anything on Matzah. According to Christians, that on the Shabbat, he was taking a nap. He was in his tomb. And therefore, it can't apply to him. So if that's going to be the place you're going to take the prophecy, you have to leave it there, because the prophecy is specifically on the fulfillment of Chag Matzah. It means cut off. Cut off means cut off from the land of the living. It's when Dode's nephesh soul carried our guilt into Sheol, so that he was separate from the land of the living, cut off from the dimensional world that we know. And the next day he fulfilled Bikurim, firstborn children, not the pagan holiday of Easter that was born and bred in Babylon. So the whole thing is nonsensical. Anyway, it's a stealing of Dode's titles, and Ben El, or El Ben, if you want to write it in the Hebrew order, that son of God title is Dode's. The only person that God says, he is my son, I am his father, is to Dode and to no one else. So without the imagined and unattested scene playing out before the cave of Pan, the satyr of the Greek religion, there is no justification for Christ or for Christian or for Christianity or for church. It all goes away, and there is nothing left but a pile of lies. And even with it, there's nothing but a pile of lies, because it itself is a lie. So without this fabrication, there is no Jesus, there is no New Testament, there is no chair of St. Peter, there are no popes, there are no keys to heaven held by a Roman institution either. It all crumbles behind a facade crafted by Eusebius, and he had the most deceptive of pens, and he is the one who will be held accountable for having done so, and will be sent to Sheol along with all of those who promoted his lie. As evidence of this, not a word of what Eusebius composed on behalf of his Roman Catholic overlords, particularly Constantine, whom he served as a propagandist, in Matthew 16 or Mark 8 is found in any of the pre-Constantine codices containing portions of the Christian New Testament. By the way, you should also know that Mark was written 10 years after Paul's death. Paul had already written the first 14 books of the Christian New Testament. He had both Luke and Mark as his companions, and he was the one who came up with the idea of a gospel. He is the one who came up with the idea of a New and Old Testament. He's the one who called the Torah pornography, and he's the one who came up with the notion of a Jesus Christ, of which no one existed by that name or that title in first century Judea. Absolutely no way, no how, under any circumstance, nor is there any contemporaneous eyewitness account to say anything other than he's a fable. Now, Mark was the first of those four written after Paul had written his first 14 books. So if the New Testament was actually ordered in the order that it was written, you would have the book of Galatians first, and it is an absolute mess. It is constant contradictions. It is inaccurate historically. It is inaccurate culturally. It is filled with internal contradictions, and it goes to war against the three brothers of Dode. It creates the myth of a Jesus. It presents Paul as the grand poobah of the world. He claims a title apostle that does not exist and anywhere in the Torah, prophets, and Psalms. The only person that is named Shaul that makes claims against Dode and against God and against the Torah that is mentioned in the Torah, prophets, and Psalms is a man named Shaul, and it's written in Shabuwah, 666 years exactly to the time that Paul wrote his first letter to the Galatians, and it calls Paul by name as the plague of death. And it talks about his timing and what he would say and how egregious it was. God despises him. And Paul even admitted in his second letter to the Corinthians that he was demon possessed. And so Mark was written per Paul's instructions 10 years after Paul's death. Luke was written shortly thereafter, and most of Luke either copies Paul or it's written in the style of the Iliad and the Odyssey. And then you have Matthew, which wasn't written until 95 CE, 3 generations after the fact, by someone who was completely unknown, and it is 100% plagiarized. 70 to 80% of it comes from Mark and Luke, and the parts that don't come from the Ebonites. And so it is pure plagiarism on top of plagiarism on top of copy edits. Anyway, this statement regarding you are the Christ isn't found in any of the 69 pre-Constantine codices. The single most important line in the entirety of the Christian New Testament does not appear in any of them. It is incredible when Eusebius finally writes it, and it wouldn't have been, and it didn't exist in any previous document. So the earliest evidence of the Gospel of Matthew and Mark, both, are presented in Papyrus 45, which was written around 250 CE in Alexandria, Egypt. 250 CE is the earliest evidence of either one of those two alleged Gospels. And it contains the text of Matthew chapters 20 and 21, 25 and 26, along with portions of Mark chapters 4 through 9 and 11 through 12. Luke chapters 6 and 7 and 9 through 14. John chapters 4 and 5 and 10 and 11. This is now 250 CE. There's Acts chapters 4 through 17. And thus, not a word from the 16th chapter of Matthew, thereby excluding the religion's most essential citation. As for Mark 8, Papyrus 45 includes 8:1, 8:14 through 25, and what is now 8:34 through 40. But guess what? There is nothing in the narrative that conveniently starts with the 26th verse. Doesn't exist. What are the odds of that?
If you can't dazzle them with brilliance, just baffle them with bullshit. And that's what the religious do.
So this was added in the mid-4th century by Eusebius. Jesus and his followers. By the way, the first time there was a Jesus ever spoken, the first time the name Jesus was ever spoken by anyone was in 1629. It's the 3rd edition of the King Iam's Bible. Jesus and his followers went from there. By the way, if he was so important, he had so many followers, why isn't there a single contemporaneous eyewitness account? Why isn't there something chiseled in stone? Why isn't there a note from anyone? Why is there absolutely nothing from his time? Not a single reference from the 1st century CE. None. Why? Oh, somebody said, oh, but Eusebius, he mentions him. Eusebius wasn't even born in 33 CE when it was all over. He wasn't even born. So come on. No, there's nothing. This whole thing is a con job. Jesus and his followers went from there to the towns of Caesarea Philippi. Lie. Absolute lie. There was no town ever of Caesarea Philippi. Didn't exist. He made up the town because he didn't want to say the name of the place that he is actually talking about, that he will admit later is Panea, the very place where Pan, the Greek god of the underworld, the satyr, the image of the devil, hung out. I mean, this is just like Eusebius writing into the text in the mid 4th century that there was a Jesus of Nazareth, because Constantine's mommy claimed that he came from Nazareth. She must have liked the place, but she was there in the 4th century. In the 1st century, there was no such town. Didn't exist. As they went, he asked his followers. This is now 3 years. Where this is placed is 3 years into the story. And he's within days of allegedly being crucified. That's the whole thing. They're on the way into Jerusalem for him to be crucified. And that's when he asked this question. You want to believe that these guys, according to the Gospels, they were with him for 3 years, and for 3 years they never had this conversation? Can you be that stupid? Who do people say I am? They answered, some say you're John the Baptist. No, John the Baptist never existed. There were no Baptists in 1st century Jerusalem or in the province of Yehuda, known today as Judah. No Baptists. Zero. The story of baptism is first told in the Sibylline oracles that were the religious texts of the senators in Rome. There's no reference to a baptism anywhere in the Torah, prophets, and Psalms. It is a lie. So now we have our third lie. Jesus followers, fourth, Jesus followers, and the place that the question was asked. It didn't exist. And now we have some saying you're John the Baptist. There was no John the Baptist. And some say Elijah. Now, why would they say he's Elijah? Now, come on. First of all, the name is Elia. If they said that his name was Elia, then wouldn't they know that God's name was Yahweh? Elia means Yahweh is God. So if they are saying that its name is Elia, then they would know that God's name is Yahweh, and yet there's not a single mention anywhere of Yahweh. And, Elia is an interesting character. He's a recluse. His primary purpose, the thing that made Elia famous, is he was in complete opposition to religion and politics. He slaughtered the religious and political authorities in Israel. Slaughtered them. Bested them in debate, and then annihilated them. And so how could he be Elia if in fact he is starting a new religion? And how could he be Elia if Paul had written some, this would have been, this was written, 4th century, but Paul in his letter to the Romans contradicted God and said, the Roman government's wonderful. It was put in place by God. Yeah. So according to Paul, the Roman government was established by God to destroy Jerusalem, to destroy and kill his people. And by the way, it was wholly pagan. But that's what Paul wrote, and people don't seem to give a crap because I guess they'll believe anything. Anyway, his name Elijah is just a stupid, really stupid claim. Because it tells you what God's name is and who's God. Others say one of the early preachers. There were no early preachers. God does not have a preacher. Preachers is a Christian concept. There are no early preachers. There were prophets. Oh, then he says, so after stupid, stupid, and stupid, dumb and dumber and dumbest, we have, but what about you? He said. He's been with this dude now, allegedly, for 3 years, 3.5 years. He says, so who do you say I am? You mean to tell me you never answered that question, not once? So when he said, hey, why don't you follow me? I said, I'm just a Joe Schmo out here. I just like, I just want to follow him. Well, I have no real purpose. I'm a nobody. Just follow me because, well, for giggles. Oh, but Peter, and by the way, he couldn't have been Peter then. He would have been Shimon because he wasn't named Rock until after this statement. So this is just literary stupidity to say Peter answered. You couldn't have had a Peter prior to this because his name was Shimon. Oops. He says, you are the Christ. Well, why would he say such a thing? First of all, evidently, the gospel Jesus never said such a thing. Never. And there is no prophecy of a Christ. So for someone to say you are the Christ, that'd be like saying, oh, who do you say I am? Oh, well, you're the donkeldooter. Yep, you're the donkeldooter. I know that for sure. Yeah, I know you're the donkeldooter. What in the hell is a donkeldooter? Well, I don't really know, but that's what I think. I think you're the donkeldooter. That's as stupid as saying you were the Christ. The only reason that it doesn't read for somebody today as stupid is because the stupid religion has been established amongst 2.5 billion people who aren't smart enough to realize this is nonsense. But Jesus, nobody named Jesus existed until 1629. Warned, strictly charging them that they should tell no one of him. Mark 8:27 through 30. So you have this imaginary conversation that is totally nonsensical. It is contrived. It has a 0% chance of being real. It falls all over itself in every which way. And then when he finally says, "Oh, a person whose name didn't exist as Peter at the time said, you are the Christ," and the first thing you get out of alleged Jesus' mouth is a strict warning, strictly charging them that they should tell no one of him. Well, how in the hell did you get the Christian religion? Huh? Why at this point would you have had 14 books prior to this being published that create a Christ fellow? Why do you have a Christian religion? Why do you have Christians? Why do you have Christmas? Why do you have any of this stuff? If your alleged God man, and the first time he hears this, oh, wow, what an amazing thing, warns and says, don't you dare tell anyone about this. And yet you want to say that, okay, but it's okay to publish the book on it, right? Doesn't anybody think? Yeah, not only is this line devastating to the Christian myth, it, of course, appears nowhere prior to Eusebius in the mid-4th century codices, Vaticanus and Sinaiticus, which are, by the way, an utter and complete literary disaster. Moreover, Eusebius made a careless mistake, adding additional commentary to the text of Matthew when it was concocted 2 to 3 decades after Mark's hearsay account, also by an impostor. Unwritten information is always lost over time. It's never gained. And so, since we know when the impostor wrote Matthew, because it's plagiarized from 3 different sources, and we know the history of the text, and we know when Mark was written, and that he was hanging around Paul and was serving Paul's interests, because Paul actually says that's the case, you could not have had an account that is 70 to 80% plagiarized from Mark and Luke, written a minimum of 20 years after Mark, add information, becoming more detailed. It's an impossibility. Fails the logic test. If he had done it the other way around, you'd have a chance to pull it off. Did he know when they were written? Probably not. So he took a guess, and he guessed wrong. And he put the book of Matthew before the book of Mark to create the false impression that, well, the more detailed one came first. But that's not what actually happened. That's like the false impression of Christians thinking the first book of their New Testament is Matthew, followed by Mark, Luke, John, and the book of Acts, when actually the first book of their New Testament is Galatians, followed by the other 13 books that Paul wrote, followed then by Mark and Luke, and not until 95 CE, Matthew and John, who we have no idea who wrote them. There's absolutely no evidence whatsoever as to who wrote them. So nevertheless, the narrative of Eusebius, that's quite a nevertheless, composed to justify Christianity in the Gospel of Matthew, picked up where he had left off at the gate of hell, and then, he decided to become a novelist. You could tell from his whole depictions of other things that he wrote, he was really dying to be a novelist. He just wished he could have written the whole thing from scratch. That would have been quite a story. It would have challenged the Odyssey. It says Jesus, no one named Jesus, existed in first century Judea, which was the province of Iuda and under Roman control. Came into the country of Caesarea Philippi. So the imagined name appears exactly the same way in both texts. And it's false. It never existed. So how is it possible that the same counterfeit name appears in both texts, written exactly the same way, when it never existed, unless it was written by the same forger? I don't think there is a rational answer to that. He asked his followers, "Who do people say that I, the Son of Man, am?" Added information. You know the Son of Man and where that comes from? Ezekiel. Do you know that Ezekiel is Satan's autobiography? Ezekiel fails Yahweh's test of a prophet as it's presented in Devarim, two different places, but most detailed in the 18th chapter, in every possible way. So if that is his title, he ain't who he says he is. He's representing Satan. They said, as opposed to he said, it's they said. Some say you are John the Baptist, who never existed. And some say Elijah. It's Elia, which same argument applies in both. And others say, we now have a Jeremiah. Well, who in their right mind is going to pick Jeremiah? I mean, there is nothing in common. And if you go to Jeremiah, then you're really screwed. Because Jeremiah is the only person who mentions anything that could be perceived as a renewed covenant. 31st chapter. But he states that the renewed covenant is with Yisrael and with Yehudah, not with Goyim, Romans, Greeks, and a church. And so now you are really screwed, blued, and tattooed if it's Jeremiah. And Jeremiah goes on to say that when the covenant is finally renewed in the last days, which they were nowhere near, with Yisrael and Yehudah, Yahweh, a God's name who they do not know, is going to write his Torah inside of everyone. Torah. If he's going to write his Torah inside of everyone, then this Christian religion that seeks to annul the Torah is false from the beginning, isn't it? So the moment you say Jeremiah, you're screwed. It's over. John the Baptist, no such person. Baptist, no such profession. Elijah, then it tells you what God's name really is. Yirmiah also tells you what God's name really is. It ends with Yah, but he is the one who tells you that there can be no New Testament that is contrary to the Torah. Or again, he throws in one of the early preachers. Why? Because by this time there were lots of Christian preachers. There just weren't any Jewish preachers. So no. He said to them, but who do you say I am? This time he puts in Simon's name. It's that is his given name, Shimon. And it adds Shimon Peter. But he couldn't have been Shimon Peter at that point, because he could just have been Shimon, because the "you are the rock," which is the basis of Peter, came after this. So this is just adding things to a story without any chronology. It's kind of like the Quran. Shimon Peter said, "You are the Christ." Again, no such person has ever been predicted. So, you are the wallpaper hanger. I mean, there is no justification for that at all. It would have been again saying, you're the faucet. You are the son of the living God. No, no way, pal. Guess why? Because the son of the living God, according to the living God, is Dode. And if you don't know that, then shame on you. God says it 3 times. He is my son, I am his father. And every time it's Dode's name that is mentioned as he is my son. Doesn't work, does it? So Jesus, a name that does not exist and did not exist until the 17th century, said to him, Shimon, son of Yonah. By the way, he was not son of Yonah. There was a Shimon. He was the son of Ruth and her husband Boaz. You are happy. Oh, happy. Oh, that's what I would have said. Yeah. You are faucet. So you are so happy, because you did not learn this from man. Well, he'd been sitting there with a man that Paul's claimed as God. Christianity says this Jesus fellow is God, as if God is small enough to be a man, but they don't bother with the fact that God can't be a man and that men cannot kill God. But so much for the details. Let's not sweat the details. Happy because you did not learn this from man. So, he's been 3 years with alleged Jesus fellow and not a single conversation about this. His identity was unknown to them. And you want to base a religion on a person who is known by this identity when he spent 3 years with some schmoes out there walking around the wilderness, and he never once told him who he was. My Father in heaven, he doesn't know his name either, has shown you this. Well, if you knew that, pal, then why'd you ask the question? If you knew that was the answer, why did you ask the question? If you're supposed to be the same as the Father in heaven or a real God, wouldn't you have known the answer? Well, let's not sweat the details. And I tell you that you are Peter. This is the first time that it was actually Kephesh is what he would have said. It's Hebrew for stone. You are stone. Dumb as stone. You are stone. And on this stone, same word, by the way, I will build my church. Yep. So he gives legitimacy to the title Christ and Christian and gives the legitimacy to church, except for the fact it wasn't spoken by pretend Jesus. It was written in the 4th century. And there is no Greek word for church. Not a single word. And anywhere in the Greek text of the Christian New Testament will you find anything that can be translated church or transliterated church. It's from ecclesia, and ek means out called. Out called. Not going into an institution, not going into a building. It's out called. Ecclesia is not church, not the sound. The only thing it sounded like church was Church, which was the pagan's daughter of Helios of the Germanic religion. She's a pagan goddess. The powers of hell will not be able to have power over my church. Hell doesn't have any powers. None. It's, by the way, it's not hell. It's Sheol. And Sheol has no powers. It's an inanimate object. And there is no church. And I will give you the keys of the holy nation of heaven. Well, holy in Hebrew is diseased. God does not have a nation of heaven. He has a nation of people, and they happen to be Jews. And there are no keys. So, giving the keys to heaven? No. No mention of any place where there's keys of heaven. Not in the Torah, prophets, and Psalms. So why would he say such a thing? If he was a predicted individual, if he was supposed to be God, he would have known there's no reference to keys. He would have known that holy in Hebrew is diseased. He would have known that the only nation that mattered was Israel, and that there was no nation of heaven. Whatever you do not allow on earth will not have been allowed in heaven. So he is telling a man, by the way, that he will refer to as Satan in the next breath, that this man has control over heaven. You believe that, then you can probably believe anything in Christianity. Whatever you do not allow on earth will not have been allowed in heaven. I mean, it's not a very well written sentence, but it basically says, whatever you're against here on earth, heaven will be against. As if, well, God's got no say in this matter. You're smarter than God. This man that he will call Satan in the next breath, he just says, you have total control over heaven. Not me, no, you. Mm-hmm. He's the same guy that, wigged out when there was the crucifixion, not knowing that if he is the person that was prophesied, Dode, he came to be crucified on Pesach. He wrote that he would be crucified on Pesach 1,000 years before he endured it in the 22nd Psalm. And so rather than wigging out over it, you would have said, there you go. You saw it through. You finished the job. You did exactly as you promised. But nope. He has some control over heaven. Whatever you allow on earth will have been allowed in heaven. Yep. Given this man, who was a pathetic guesser, came up with, a bogus title, that whatever you want, whatever you do, you are in charge now. You're more important than God. You get to choose exactly what happens in heaven and what doesn't happen in heaven. Imagine. And people believe this rubbish. You know why he's saying that? Because his church, the Roman Catholic Church, wants to have total control over God. The Roman Catholic Church wants to hold the keys to heaven. They want heaven to be a holy nation of Roman Catholicism. They want what they decide to be allowed on earth to be allowed in heaven, and what they decide against on earth not to be allowed in heaven. And so it was written entirely to empower the Roman Catholic Church, and it's obvious. Then, with strong words, he told his followers to tell no one that he was the Christ. mean, you can't make up stupid at this level. The whole purpose of this was allegedly to announce you're the Christ. And you have the guy that they're giving this title to saying, don't you tell anybody that I'm the Christ. Matthew 16:13 through 20. I mean, this is so blatantly fraudulent. It's just flabbergasting to me that Christians are so easily duped. And of course, the tripe which follows is even more harmful to the Christian myth, especially with Paul admitting to having been demon-possessed 3 decades before Matthew was plagiarized, and 3 centuries before it was editorialized. From that time on, Jesus began to tell his followers that he had to go to Jerusalem and suffer many things. Now, I'm here to tell you the only reason that Dode, who is the actual Messiah and Son of God, was going to Jerusalem, the only reason that he was conceived in this particular life was to fulfill Passover, Matzah, and Bikurim. And Passover had to be fulfilled exactly when it was on Passover in 33 CE, because it represented year 4000, yeah. And it had to be on Moriah, because that's where the dress rehearsal had occurred 2,000 years earlier. And of course, he had been released from Edom, entering this house of, we call this planet, 4,000 years prior to this. That's why the Passover lamb comes into the home 4 days before Pesach. So he says, I got to go there. Now, Dode would have said that. Yeah, I got to go there. And they would have known it, because that was the entire purpose that he was born into this particular life. Hard things would come from the leaders and from the head of the religious leaders of the Jews. So he's now blaming his crucifixion on the Jews, as opposed to, if he is there to fulfill prophecy, then he is there to suffer crucifixion as the Passover lamb. You don't blame it on the Jews. You say he's there for this purpose. He has chosen this purpose. To then blame it on the religious leaders of the Jews is nonsense. They didn't even know that Dode had come, even though the prophets were clear that he would come at exactly this time. They did not recognize Dode, which is to their shame. That's why the legends of Jesus grew. But to blame, which that they're saying, I'm going to suffer many things from the religious leaders of the Jews and the teachers of the law. Yeah, dastardly teachers of the Torah, man. They're the ones that are going to do terrible things to me. This is why Christianity is so vile. Not only did they turn man into a god, well, in their case, a myth into a god. To create the myth, they had to steal the identity and the achievements of the actual Messiah and Son of God, our Savior, who actually was crucified to fulfill Passover in 33 CE, and that's King Dode. So they robbed him to create the myth. And then when the myth dies unrelated to Passover, they blame the Jews and the Torah. When he walked out of the pages of the Torah to save the Jews. This is how twisted Roman Catholicism is and Christianity is. He told them that he would be killed and that 3 days later he would be raised from the dead. Half truth. Maybe less. Dode knew that his body, his bashar, which was disposable, would die as the Passover lamb on Passover. So now this is now 3 days before he is going to fulfill Passover. They're having this conversation about who he is. They didn't even know who he was prior to that. And there's no credible explanation for that, other than it was just contrived and made up. Dode was born for this purpose. His mother and father, Ruth and Boaz, knew exactly why he was here, why they were there to support him. His whole life And this particular life was for that particular purpose. And he knew the exact date that he would suffer Passover. He knew the date that he would fulfill Matzah, which was the bigger date, where he would take our guilt into Sheol on the Shabbat. And then he knew that as the Bakor, the firstborn son of God, that he would celebrate Bakurim, firstborn children, on the first day of the week. He knew exactly the order of events. His body would not be raised from the dead. He knew that this explanation in the Torah of Pesach requires the body of the Passover lamb to be destroyed that night, incinerated. And it was. Resurrection from the dead of a physical body was what the Egyptians practiced. It's part of Judaism. It was part of the Babylonian religion. It's why all these numbskulls that were kings, including even Genghis Khan, was buried with great treasures, with all sorts of servants buried with them, killed and buried with them. And you go back all the way to Ur and Sumer, and you find that when a king died, he killed all the concubines and all of the assistants, all the staff, even soldiers, and buried them all with the king, because he was going to be bodily resurrected. That's why the pharaohs were mummified and given all the food and all the stuff they were going to need in the afterlife, because they were going to be bodily resurrected. People are fixated on bodies. No, purely pagan, not going to happen, did not happen, would be counterproductive even if it did happen, and it couldn't have happened. It's nonsense. So now he's Peter, just purely Peter. Took Jesus away from the others, and he spoke sharp words to him. No, I'm not going to do that. No clue as to why he was here. And he said, "Never, Lord. This must never happen to you." The entire reason he was here was for that purpose. But no, Lord. So this Father in heaven that allegedly told him he was the Christ wasn't smart enough to tell him, well, you're here to fulfill Passover. He's destroying his credibility in the next sentence. And yet Christians are not smart enough to figure that out. Shame on you. I mean, is stupid required to believe? And Jesus then turned to Peter and said, "Get behind me, Satan." So the guy that just made your big pronouncement. I mean, this is your big deal, man. You're coming out party. You be the Christ, man. I don't know what that means, but you be the Christ. Yeah. And the next line, he says, "Get behind me, Satan." Turned to him and said, "Get behind me, Satan." On a 1 to 10 scale of stupid, this is a 10. A 1 to 1,000 scale of stupid, this is 1,000. And yet, this is the entire diatribe narrative that is required to establish the Christian religion. It doesn't exist without this stupid insertion. Then Jesus turned to Peter and he said, "Get behind me, Satan. You are standing in my way. You are not thinking how God thinks." Well, you just said you were, but now you're not. You are thinking how man thinks. You just said, but man didn't tell you anything. Matthew, anyway, 16, 21 through 23. It was religion by clowns. This is like the Trump administration. And the ringleader of this circus, its promoter and propagandist, even its author, was Eusebius, the man who performed the same roles for Emperor Constantine, who was a scumbag. He was a murderous, conniving general, an egomaniacal jerk. Now, as I have mentioned, the earliest witness to the 16th chapter of Matthew, as well as of Mark 8, 27 and 30, are found in the highly disreputable Codex Vaticanus and the Codex Sinaiticus. Both were composed by Eusebius, both on orders from Emperor Constantine, both between 325 and 360 CE. In particular, all other presentations of Matthew 16 were copied from these, with codices Bezae, Washingtonius, Ephraimi Receptus, scribed in the 5th century, followed by the codices Perpetus and Petrolamus and Sinopenus, 200 years thereafter. There is no contemporaneous witness to any of this. We're dealing with 3 to 5 centuries of intermission. Hard to explain if your guy is supposed to be God, isn't it? Now, beyond this, the very creation of Matthew is a fraud, falsely claiming to be a disciple, of which there were none. The anti-Semitic author of the gospel was, and gospel is Paul's term, it's from Evangelion. Paul conceived the concept. Paul said he had an Evangelion, and if even there was a Evangelion from heaven that differed from his mattered, heaven's didn't. He was 3 generations removed from the time that Dode actually fulfilled the Mikra in the spring of 33 CE, including the 80% plagiarized from Mark and Luke and 100% pilfered from the Ebonim. It is filled with errors of fact, historical anomalies, incredulous accounts like this, and contradictions, many attributable to the bishop of Caesarea, Eusebius. With the cave of Pan serving as a backdrop to this demonic tale, Eusebius crafted the words which established the Roman Catholic Church, granting it supremacy over Yahweh, over heaven, giving it the keys, giving it control of what would happen in heaven and what couldn't happen in heaven. Even the birth of a church. And it only gets worse. Before the cross entered the picture, the Christian counterfeit supposedly asked his followers to join him on the torture stake. What a horrible, demented, and grotesque request. It reads, "Then Jesus said to his disciples, 'If anyone desires to come after me, let him deny himself and take up his cross and follow me.'" Oh, crucifixion for everybody. Got a great deal. We have a special this afternoon only. Crucifixions for everybody. Pick up your cross, you follow me. For whoever desires to save his life will lose it. Oh, well, you want salvation? Out of luck. We got no one, anybody seeking salvation, no salvation for you. But whoever loses his life, oh yeah, well, you die for me. You go pick up your cross. You get crucified for my sake. I don't know. How would somebody else getting crucified be of any value to the person being crucified? I mean, if you were substitutes, okay, Romans, I got your deal for you. We're going to do a 2-for-1 today. There are going to be 2 of us. We'll substitute, be crucified for this fellow over here. He can get down off the cross. You can nail us up to the cross. 2-for-1 deal, special, just for today. That way you'll find it if you lose your life for him. So here is the Christian Savior who allegedly died for the Christians, saying the only way that you can survive and be saved is if you die for me. That's what he just wrote. Anybody see a problem with that? For what profit is man if he gains the whole world and he loses his soul? What will a man give in exchange for his soul? For the Son of Man. We already forgot that Son of God thing, didn't we?
Yep.
We already forgot that Christ thing, didn't we? He will come in the glory of his Father. Well, if he's going to come in the glory of his Father, first of all, he is not the Son of Man. And second of all, he is Dode. Because the only one who can claim that can come in the glory of his Father is Dode. And you ain't Dode, pal. With his angels. There are no angels. You know, the Christian church got angels. It's just really stupid. The Torah says malach. Malach means messenger. And so in Greek, they wrote the Greek word for messenger, agelos. And rather than translating it as messenger, which would have been the proper translation of malach, they transliterated the Greek word agelos as angels, and they created a class of being that, Christians and Muslims and everyone else seems to think actually exist just because of a stupid clerical mistake. Not knowing when you're supposed to translate or transliterate a word. Titles, you transliterate. If you're going to transliterate it, you got to translate it from the original text, which would be Malak. Words, you translate. Messenger. No justification for angel. His angels, and then he will reward each according to his works. Well, oops. We got a problem again. Because according to Paul, there are no works. According to Paul, it's all by faith. All you got to do to get salvation, according to Paul, is to believe me, but I, Paul, say, and that's the whole deal. There's nothing more to it than, but I, Paul, say. And here you got pretend Jesus saying, you're going to be rewarded based upon your works. Might be a problem. Contradiction. Verily, I say unto you, there are some standing here who will not taste death until they see the Son of Man coming in his kingdom. These boys needed a copy editor. I got a fact checker, Mike, as you got to meet in the last family hour. He would have said, excuse me, but you can't say that. Not true. Because guess what? The Son of Man, let's just pretend that he is the real Messiah. Just pretending here. Although he doesn't use the title now. He's been called out. He says, you're the Christ guy. You're the Son of the living God. And he went right back to Son of Man. By the way, he couldn't have been the Son of Man, could he? Because he claims that he was, the Christian New Testament claims that he was born of a virgin, which means there was no man there. So he could not have been a Son of Man, could he? Not according to the Christian mythology. He could not have been a Son of Man. Impossible. So the moment that he uses the term Son of Man, you've destroyed the whole concept of Mary and the virgin birth. Ever think that through?
No, they don't think it through.
And until they see the Son of Man coming in his kingdom. Oopsie. Problem. Dode's not returning as the Messiah and Son of God until 2033, year 6,000 years. He missed it by just a smidge, 2,000 years. Do you think any one of those people still living? He said that you won't taste death until this happens, and this isn't happening for another 7 years, and we're just shy of 2,000 years removed from that date. It's a false prophecy. It's a false statement. It didn't happen. It's just like when Paul wrote that his rapture was going to occur during his lifetime. And he had the wrong date. He had it on Teruah, trumpets, when it's Shabuwah. And it didn't happen during his lifetime, did it? It's going to happen 2,000 years later and on Shabuwah, not Teruah. This is the same thing. You're not going to taste death until you see the Son of Man coming in his kingdom. The kingdom of Dode, when the earth is restored to the conditions of Eden, takes place in 2033 on Yom Kippurim. He missed it by a tremendous amount. I'm trying to get my dog's attention because she's chomping away at her paws again. And I can typically handle that for about 5 minutes, but as it goes on for 10, it kind of gets on everybody's nerves. Okay. I don't know where the glasses fell, probably within 2 feet of her, but it was enough just to startle her, to get her attention away from biting her feet, because she knows she's not supposed to do that. Yeah, because she'll do it to the point where she can't walk, and then she'll just cry. Woe is me, pick me up, carry me. It was all very sadistic, wasn't it? Particularly this request. It was a preposterous lie. It was ghoulish from beginning to end, including the misidentification and the false prophecy. And yet Eusebius, paper-thin deception. A lie so full of holes, there were more yeast than grain in his loaf. And it served to legitimize the Roman Catholic Church, discrediting Yahweh while replacing Dode, giving the church control of heaven, literally the keys to heaven. And what goes on there? who gets in, who doesn't. And it all played out before Constantine, the Pan of the Roman empires. Get behind me, Satan. Indeed. Well, we've now gone a little over an hour. This is a good place for us to stop. I will continue our presentation of all things we can know about Shabuwah, and we'll continue to clear away the rubbish of Christianity, because until you do, you can't see what the truth is. You will not have an appreciation for why Shabuwah is not Pentecost. You will have no appreciation for why Jesus never existed, and why Dode is the actual Messiah and Son of God who fulfilled Pesach, Matzah, and Bikurim. And until you know that, you can't capitalize on Shabuwah, because it is a Bikurim harvest. So all of this is germane to your understanding. It is basic to our very appreciation of who God is and what he is offering and how he is making these things available to us. So I thank you for listening. I hope you had some fun as we went and ridiculed the lies of the Christian New Testament. Talk to you tomorrow. Good day.
Hey there, thanks for tuning in. That was Fetch. Gotta run now. Catch y'all on our next podcast.